Evening, everyone. It's 5:31. We are going to have a couple of moments of grace at the last time I looked, which was just moments ago. We had over 180 people registering for this event. So we're all very excited. We're going to have lots and lots of guests. So we're just waiting a few minutes until everybody can get from the waiting room into the Zoom call. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes.
Marie, while we're waiting, good evening, everybody. It's Brian Clark. I am blessed and fortunate enough to be chair of the board of CTS right now. And on behalf of the entire board and all of CTS, I'd like to welcome everyone to this evening's lecture. We obviously would love to be with all in person, but through the blessings of what we have now with Zoom, we can have people from all over the country join us as well. So we'd like to welcome everybody and thank you all for joining us and wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Brian.
Absolutely.
Good evening. To understand the present, we must mine from the past. CTS, Rooks, FTE, Rockefeller. What is now the Forum for Theological Exploration, or FTE, was once the Fund for Theological Education. The fund has as one of its main tenets the education of African Americans and the preparation of African Americans for ministerial leadership. One of the first program associates with FTE was none other than the Reverend Dr. Charles Shelby Rooks. It was Dr. Rooks's task to put in conversation African Americans and theological education. One of the offspring of this program, if you will, was the Rockefeller Fellows, a program that fully funded persons who were interested in pursuing degrees in seminaries and divinity schools. It was a program designed solely for African Americans in ministry. Rooks, Rockefeller, FTE, CTS. In 2016, I had the opportunity to preach at a church in New Jersey. And as usual, I took my CTS stuff with me. I had brochures, pamphlets, pens, all kinds of materials related to our programs. After preaching, I talked with the pastor and left a few of the items with some of the church members. A few months later, the pastor called me and said, "I have someone who wants to speak with you." Well, on the phone was a very esteemed and renowned preacher pastor. This person told me, "Well, I see there's a Chicago Theological Seminary brochure on this desk. I also know there's a picture of C. Shelby Rooks on one of these brochures." This person went on to tell me, "I knew C. Shelby Rooks. I was a Rockefeller Fellow when he was the administrator for that program." Rockefeller, Rooks, CTS, FTE. And so we gather perhaps because we have FTE roots. Who knows? Someone may have Rockefeller roots. We gather because CTS, Chicago Theological Seminary, is in our blood. We gather perhaps because, like our guest speaker, we are pole climbers, if not literally, maybe figuratively. We gather to glean from the intellectual residue of the Reverend Dr. C. Shelby Rooks, the first African American to serve as president at a predominantly white theological institution through Chicago Theological Seminary. We gather, this is our pandemic presence. Thanks to the tools of technology, here we are on our iPads, our iPhones, our desktops, our laptops. Thanks to Zoom, here we are. And we gather perhaps, yes, to mine from the past, to mine from the intellectual residue of Shelby Rooks, in order that we may have resources for the present, and yes, reserves for the future. So yes, Chairman Clark, on behalf of our Board of Trustees, on behalf of our President, Dr. Stephen Ray, on behalf of our faculty, staff, and our wonderful students, it is my honor, my privilege to welcome you to this annual C. Shelby Rooks Lecture.
The Word of God says that we are to enter into God's gates with thanksgiving and into God's courts with praise. We are to be thankful unto God and bless God's name. As we prepare to enter our time together today, let us bow for a word of prayer. God of peace, wisdom, enlightenment, and love, we invite you to preside over this time together today as we prepare our hearts, minds, and spirits for the C. Shelby Rooks Lecture 2020. Help us to listen and engage intently to the speaker that you have called and assigned for such a time as this, our courageous sister, Bree Newsome Bass. God, help us to listen not for the sake of listening only, but for the sake of action that leads to the outcomes and the justice that you would have for us. We are in a time of a failing economy, so we need your spirit of provision in this space. We are in a time of a disaster in our democracy, and we need your spirit to do what only your spirit can do. We are in a time of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we need your reminders that you truly are the one in control, and you are the ultimate healer. And we are certainly in a time of civil unrest as we continue to mourn the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, to name just a few. God, we need you to be the comforter, counselor, and crisis solver that you are in this time and in this space today. And so, God, we ask that your spirit rest, rule, and abide with us. In the name of Jesus we pray, as together we say, amen, amen, and amen.
It's all in my head. You're not good enough, you don't have a chance. So just give it up while you are here. This is what I hear inside my head. Stay in your lane. That's what you already know all about. You don't want to stretch out and possibly be shut down. This is what I hear inside my head. You're in me and I'm in you. Everything I want to do is to please you and only you. Free me from me. My enemy was my enemy. Now I have the victory, and with you my life's complete. Now I am free. Years have gone by. I haven't scratched the surface of plans for my life. Doubt and fear passes through my mind, but but a new day is rising, so I will shine. No more fear. God has created me with just what I need. Wisdom, confidence, and integrity. This is what I need to become the best me. You're in me, and I'm in you. Everything I want to do is please you, and only you. Free me from my enemy. Was my enemy. Now I have victory, and with you, my life's complete. Now I am free. But I am more than a conqueror. My days will be greater starting now. I refuse to let these thoughts take over my head. I am more than a conqueror. My days will be greater starting now. I refuse to let these thoughts take over my head. That's not me.
That's not me no more. God has opened doors. I have much in store.
Oh yeah. I am so free. That's not
That's
me.
not me no more. God has opened doors. I have something to live for.
Yeah. Oh, that's not me no more. God has opened doors. I have something to live for. I am free, yeah. Oh, that's not me no more. God has opened doors. I have something to live for. Yeah, yeah.
I am free.
That's not me no more. God is still opening doors. Said I'm free. Oh, that's not me no more. God is still opening doors. Said I'm free. I'm free. Yes, I'm free. No longer bound. No more chains holding me. I'm free in my mind. I'm free in my soul. I'm free in my spirit. Lord, take control. Yes, I'm free. Lord, I'm free. You didn't have to do it, but I'm so glad you did. You never left me alone. That's why I'm free. I'm so grateful. Oh, I'm free. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's not me no more. God has opened doors. I have so much to live for.
Yes, we are free. C. Shelby, Charles Shelby Rooks, 1924 through 2001. A legacy, by definition, is something passed on from a predecessor or the past. It is a gift intended to support, direct, and sustain a coming generation. Based on the hard work and sacrifice of the former, it may be money or property, but it can also take the form of commitments and values that guide and direct. Today, we honor the life and ministry of Charles Shelby Rooks. And in doing so, we receive anew an inheritance that enlivens our work and sharpens our witness as we move into the future. Charles Shelby Rooks was born on October 19th, 1924 in Beaufort, North Carolina. His family's roots in the United Church of Christ tradition goes back to 1879, when his great-great-grandfather organized a congregational church in Beaufort. Rooks spent his formative years in Harlem and Brooklyn, New York, also in Norfolk, Virginia, and later served in the military. He went on to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree from Virginia State University and a Master of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary in New York. He did additional graduate studies at Columbia University Teachers College in New York, Oxford University in England, the North American College in Rome, Italy, and the Episcopal Theological Seminary of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. After academic preparation, Rooks began his professional ministry as pastor of the Lincoln Memorial Congregational Church, the oldest African-American congregational church in Washington, D.C. His passion for preaching God's word and encouraging others took him across the United States and to 3 continents, where he engaged in ministry in a variety of settings. Through his tireless work in ecumenical circles, he collaborated with the National Council of Churches through its Department of Ministry, its Division of Church and Society, and its Commission for Higher Education. Moving to administration in the United Church of Christ, Rooks served as the Executive Vice President of the Board for Homeland Ministries. During his tenure, he addressed issues of health and welfare, evangelism, and church extension, and Christian education. He also was a devoted member on the board of directors of the UCC Office of Commissions, supporting social justice publications and shaping programs to combat discrimination in broadcasting. Throughout his career, Charles Shelby Rooks was a strong advocate for the preparation and support of church leaders through theological education, most notably serving as the president of Chicago Seminary from 1974 through 1984. This earned him the distinction of being the first African American to lead a predominantly white theological school. He also worked faithfully within the Fund for Theological Education and was a founding member of the Society for the Study of Black Religion. As a result of his work and witness as pastor, preacher, activist, administrator, and ecumenical leader, Charles Shelby Rooks has left us a rich legacy indeed. His unwavering commitment to engage in ministry in diverse contexts, his unrelenting determination to work with and on behalf of those on the margins of society, and his uncompromising energy to aim for excellence in theological education truly provides a clear template for our work ahead. John Thomas, past general minister of UCC and former senior advisor to the president here at CTS, says, Shelby's commitment to theological education and the public responsibility of the church will be an enduring legacy for a church seeking leaders sensitive to the gospel's demand of justice. And my brothers and sisters, the legacy continues to live on today, providing grants to support the seminary education of marginalized racial and ethnic groups in the United Church of Christ. For more information, there are links that will be provided. Thank you.
Thank you, Deneen, for sharing with us the legacy of Dr. Charles Shelby Rooks. Well, here I am again. I was so excited to welcome you that I forgot to tell you who I am. I'm Dr. Stephanie Buchanan Crowder, the Vice President of Academic Affairs, Academic Dean, and Associate Professor of New Testament at Chicago Theological Seminary. So happy to see you. Welcome. This is who I am. But I come before you again with an even more special task. It is my honor to present this year's Rooks Legacy Award. This year's recipient hails from Miami, Florida. The awardee is a graduate of the Florida Memorial University, one of a few historically Black colleges and universities in the state of Florida. This year's recipient is currently a Master of Divinity student at Chicago Theological Seminary. This preacher, teacher, sneakerhead wants to perhaps be a professor of homiletics and also develop large-scale curricula to help young adults. Friends, it is my pleasure, my delight to present to you the 2020 C. Shelby Rooks Legacy Award recipient, Retravia Ingram.
Good evening, everyone. I've been a student here at CTS for 3 years now, and I can safely say that I would have never fathomed being before you guys receiving an award of this caliber. See, I could have never thought that I would be a recipient of the Shelby Rooks Award. See, I've tried my best to get here over the last 2 years, but it seems as though someone has always outdid me, outworked me, or outperformed me. But you know, in retrospect, I think it was for my good, because it only made me do better. It only made me want better. See, never had I've had such an intense passion or intense fire for receiving an award of this caliber, or receiving recognition for that matter. But you know, I didn't get here by myself. You know, I want to make sure I acknowledge Dr. Terrell. She was my professor about 2 semesters ago. Dr. Terrell, she saw my gifts, she saw my talents, and she really honed in on those. She challenged me in her courses. She challenged me to do better. When I didn't want to push, she reminded me of my gifts. She reminded me of how I would wrestle with the text, and she would never let me give up. I also want to take a moment to thank Miss Deneen Collins. Miss Deneen Collins, she's always been there. When I needed a word of encouragement, she always was there to give me that word. She didn't know that I needed it, but it would come right at the right time. So I want to thank both of you guys, Dr. Terrell and Miss Collins, because without you guys, I wouldn't be before everyone today. So in closing, I want to say to each of you, never give up. A wise person once told me that the tallest oak trees grow in the strongest winds, and diamonds are built under pressure. Be that oak tree that never falls. Be that diamond that shines bright at the end of the process. And one last thing, I want to encourage each of you to never forget what God said. Don't allow your circumstances, don't allow what you see to forget what God has told you. Never allow your circumstances to allow you to forget the promise. Thank you.
Gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let injustice turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. I ain't gonna let injustice turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let no hatred turn me around. Oh, turn me around. Oh, turn me around. Ain't gonna let no hatred turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. No more beatings and killing. No more beatings and killing. No more beatings and killings. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. No more unfair treatment. No more unfair treatment. No more unfair treatment. Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep on walking, keep on talking, keep on praying, keep on singing, keep on preaching, keep on reading, marching up to freedom land.
We want to say amen right now. We just say amen. Marching up to freedom land. We're grateful for the witness and presence of all of our participants and especially our special guest, Sister Bree Newsome Bass. And as we consider the content and the spirit of the messages that will be delivered today, we also want to give you the opportunity to participate in your own special way. And so we invite you all to support our efforts to provide messages and directions of hope and liberation. And we offer you the opportunity to assist us by investing and sowing into our efforts. I'm Reverend Brian E. Smith, Director of Advancement and Strategic Partnerships at the Chicago Theological Seminary, and I invite you all to financially support the CTS campaign for racial justice. If you look in the chat box, you will find a link. I ask you to click on that link during our session this evening. It's www.justgiving.com/campaign/CTS racial justice. Join us as we continue to provide ministry and support to the faithful. We're so grateful for your presence, and we're grateful that you have chosen to support us today. God bless you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Christoph Ringer, and I'm honored to serve as the chair of the Center for the Study of Black Faith and Life here at Chicago Theological Seminary. At the center, we draw on the rich resources of religion and culture of Black people for the purposes of theological education. We believe that the rich legacy of Black faith, life, and freedom, and a commitment to justice is necessary for the nurturing of future religious leaders dedicated to the transformation of our world. And tonight, we are truly excited to have with us Miss Bree Newsome Bass. She is an accomplished filmmaker, musician, a fierce activist, and an organizer and a builder of nonprofit institutions. As many of you know, she came to national prominence when she removed the Confederate flag from the state capital of South Carolina in response to racial terror at Mother Emanuel AME Church. In this moment, our president, Stephen Ray, has called us to embody civic courage in this particular moment, a moment when the possibility of democracy is at stake. So we couldn't be more fortunate to have with us an extraordinary example of that courage, a courage nurtured in a deep faith tradition of Black people. So thank you for being with us tonight. And without further ado, I give you Miss Bree Newsome Bass.
It's very common right now to hear people describe the current times as unprecedented. In many ways, this is true. There's few, if any of us, alive today with living memories of events similar to what we're witnessing now. A once-in-a-century pandemic, a ballooning climate crisis, an economic crisis predicted to be the worst since the Great Depression, a resurgence of authoritarian governments and police states, and a growing global threat to the ideas of human rights and democracy. But there are also many things about this era that are not unprecedented. This is not the first time people have had to unite for the common good and in the interest of public health. This is hardly the first time we've seen the government fail us or abandon us, and we found ourselves needing to rely on each other, to care for each other, to build our own networks of support and mutual care. This is not the first time everyday people from all walks of life have had to summon courage in order to defeat oppressive regimes. This is not the first time we've had to fight for our rights. For me, it has been this recognition that I'm hardly among the first to struggle against injustice and oppression that has repeatedly given me the courage to do what I do. Just a few years ago, I never would have imagined becoming an activist or an organizer, and I certainly never would have imagined myself committing acts of civil disobedience or putting myself in a position to risk my life or to be arrested in service to a cause. The summer of 2013 marked a turning point in my life and set me on the course that I'm on today. It was during this summer that my family and I visited the old Slave Mart Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, a small building that was once part of a much larger complex in which enslaved Africans were once auctioned off like cattle. I stood there with my family and contemplated the unbearable thought of what it would mean to depart that slave mart, to a place unknown where I might never see my family again. Perhaps taken to a place like the plantation in Rembert, South Carolina, where my fourth great-grandparents were enslaved on the eve of the Civil War, where, according to my fourth great-grandmother, Minerva Diggs, she prayed to God every night that her children would see freedom. That moment in the slave mart stirred my soul, and I felt a deeper connection to the struggle of my ancestors. The past seemed to be rising in the summer of 2013, and not in good ways. It was in this year that the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated key parts of the Voting Rights Act, permitting states in the South to change their election laws without advance federal approval. My home state of North Carolina wasted no time in creating new election laws clearly designed to make it harder for people to vote. Laws that made it abundantly clear why the Voting Rights Act existed in the first place. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina in late July when a friend invited me out to a Moral Monday protest responding to the attack on voting rights. These were a series of protests organized by the North Carolina State NAACP that at that time were occurring on a weekly basis at the North Carolina State Capitol. I decided to attend the protest where I encountered a vibrant group of young people my age who were putting themselves on the line in the name of justice and equality. Most of them had already been arrested at least once, if not twice, for staging sit-ins at the Capitol. I was immediately impressed by the courage of their convictions and their commitment to a righteous cause. So I decided to join them in their next protest and volunteered to be arrested at a sit-in that following Wednesday. The night before the sit-in, as I was considering what I was about to do and if it really was the right action for me to take, I thought about what it meant to have the freedoms and rights that I currently enjoyed. I also considered how quickly those rights could be taken away, how fragile it all was, how I only had those rights to begin with because of the labor and sacrifices of so many who'd come before me. The many people over the centuries who'd been arrested, imprisoned, or even killed by oppressive states because they challenged unjust laws. Even after I was arrested at the sit-in and found myself handcuffed in the back of a police wagon, and then later at the jail, it only made it clearer for me how much courage had been exercised by those who'd come before me. I thought of the freedom riders being held at Parchman Prison, where they couldn't have known for certain if they'd come out alive. It made me realize all the more that I had no excuse to not take a stand in the current moment, where the danger I faced wasn't nearly as great, but where everything people before me had sacrificed their lives for was at stake. Something else very key happened in the summer of 2013. George Zimmerman was acquitted in the murder of Trayvon Martin. A 17-year-old unarmed Black teenager walking in the neighborhood where he lived had been profiled, stalked, accosted, shot, and killed in an act of vigilante violence that's painfully familiar to African Americans. His killer was arrested only after 6 weeks of intense national protest. For many of us, the case evoked visions of Emmett Till, a 14-year-old African American teenager from Chicago who was lynched while visiting family in Mississippi, and whose racist killers were acquitted of their crimes. Like many, I was deeply disturbed by the facts and circumstances surrounding Trayvon's death. The case sparked a new movement led by Black and brown youth who saw themselves in Trayvon. One such group was the Dream Defenders, a group of Black and Latinx students who, following the verdict in the Zimmerman trial, staged an occupation of the Florida State Capitol for several weeks. I traveled with a group of activists from North Carolina to Florida to visit the Dream Defenders during their occupation of the State House, and was inspired by both their vigor and their innovative styles of protest. Of course, Florida wasn't alone. Protest groups sprang up everywhere around the country. It was the beginning of what later came to be known as the Movement for Black Lives, and I was excited to be a part of it, to be part of something so much greater than myself, and to help carry forward the banner for freedom, equality, and justice. We would later learn that the Trayvon Martin case had not only inspired a new generation of young freedom fighters, but also the young man who would go on to massacre 9 Black parishioners during a prayer meeting at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. In his racist manifesto that surfaced after the killings, Dylan Roof wrote, quote, "The event that truly awakened me was the Trayvon Martin case." The violence we saw in Charleston in June of 2015 is not unprecedented, of course. There's a long history of racist violence aimed at Black churches because of their historical role as hubs of Black community organization and the vital role Black churches have played in the ongoing civil rights movement. Roof targeted Mother Emanuel specifically for this reason. He traveled to Charleston from Columbia, South Carolina, where, since 1961, a Confederate flag had flown above the state capitol as a statement of white supremacist power, as a symbol of defiance against the civil rights movement and increasing pressure from the federal government to desegregate. Being a child of the South myself and descended from a family that has been in the Carolinas for hundreds of years, the meaning of the Confederate flag and the social order it represents was never lost on me. South Carolina was the first state to secede from the Union, arguing that, quote, "We of the South contend that slavery is right." The Confederacy was formed in the belief that African Americans should remain in a perpetual state of bondage. And so the Confederate flag was a banner that first represented slavery, and then, after the South lost the war, it became emblematic of the Jim Crow laws that would govern the South for the next 100 years. Laws designed to control and limit the political and economic power of the free Black population. Laws undergirded by a culture of racial terror, whereby Black people could be murdered simply for attempting to vote. Like many Black families in the South, my own has experienced this violence. My great uncle, who was lynched in Goldsboro, North Carolina, so a white man could take his son's newspaper stand. Or my grandmother, who, as a child in Greenville, South Carolina, witnessed the Ku Klux Klan drag her neighbor from his house and beat him in the middle of the street simply because he was a Black physician who'd provided treatment to a white woman. And though the trauma of such events has led to a climate where we don't discuss these events openly or often, it is the pervasive threat of such violence that made the Confederate flag in Columbia, South Carolina, seemingly untouchable for so many years. There's a common misperception, particularly outside of this region, that the Confederate flag in South Carolina only became controversial following the shootings in Charleston. And of course, this is inaccurate. For many years, the NAACP had led a boycott of the state over the issue. The NCAA refused to host championship games there. I myself remember watching the moment on television when, in a labored act of compromise on the part of the South Carolina legislature, the flag was moved from the dome of the Capitol, where it was originally raised in the 60s, to the lawn. The state even erected a 4-foot-tall spoked fence around the flag to protect it, and wrote into the law at that time that the flag couldn't be lowered for any reason unless there was a 2/3 approval in the State House. But I think the more important point to be made is that so much blood has been spilled in the fight for racial justice up to this point, and tragically, shamefully, it took the blood of 9 more innocent people to finally shake the conscience of the state of South Carolina surrounding that symbol of slavery, hatred, and terrorism that is the Confederate flag. As long as I live, I will never forget the night of the Charleston massacre. It shook me to my core that here we were in 2015 and this level of racial hatred and terrorism was still happening in America. I will never forget the day after when, like many cities around the nation, we held a vigil for the victims and survivors of the massacre at a local AME church with its own history of involvement in the ongoing civil rights movement. I remember being asked by a reporter that night what I thought the next steps were, and my honest answer was that I didn't know. As a Christian, I was experiencing a certain crisis of faith at that moment. The people who gathered for Bible study in Emmanuel AME Church that night, Cynthia Marie Graham Hurd, Susie Jackson, Ethel Lee Lance, DePayne Middleton Doctor, Tawanza Sanders, Daniel Simmons, Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Myra Thompson, and Clementa Pinckney, rest in peace. We're only doing what Christians are called to do when anyone knocks on the doors of the church. Invite them in to fellowship and worship. A sense of shock and demoralization had overtaken the movement. You have to remember this also came in the aftermath of the Walter Scott case, which took place in North Charleston. another high-profile incident of a Black person being blatantly murdered on camera by a police officer. The next steps weren't clear for any of us. The United States and South Carolina flags were lowered to half-staff, yet the Confederate flag remained high and fully unfurled, even as Clementa Pinckney's casket was processed through the streets of Columbia, South Carolina. As photos surfaced of Dylann Roof burning the American flag while waving the Confederate flag, there was a renewed sense of outrage over the state's continued endorsement of this hate symbol. By this point, I had become an organizer in my local community in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had no specific intentions of getting arrested again at the time, but I did determine that an action to take down the flag was a cause for which I would definitely risk getting arrested again. It was at a meeting the Tuesday evening before the action that I met many of the others who were involved in this action with me. We were actually brought together by a mutual friend and acquaintance, and half of us had not met the other half prior to that day. One half of us were mostly Black and Latinx activists who had been working together on issues of anti-racism and police violence. The other half were predominantly white and had been working together in prior years with the Occupy movement and issues of environmentalism. But we came together because we recognized that we all had skin in the game and that no one was truly free so long as these systems of oppression remained in place. And it was with this awareness of history that we chose to attack a symbol of systemic racism with a direct action that symbolized its dismantling. We discussed it and decided to remove the flag immediately, both as an act of civil disobedience and as a demonstration of the power people have when we work together. We couldn't wait for South Carolina to do the right thing. We've been waiting for South Carolina to do the right thing for over 100 years regarding racial justice and equality. In 1963, King penned a letter while jailed in Birmingham and explained the need for nonviolent direct action to, quote, create such a crisis and establish such creative tension that a community that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. That was our goal with this action. By removing the flag, we would force the state of South Carolina into a moral crisis of making the choice whether to leave the flag down or to raise it back up. Of course, in the immediate aftermath, they sent a Black police officer out to raise the flag back up. But the action helped apply such public pressure to the state that they would finally remove it permanently 2 weeks later. But achieving this act of civil disobedience, we knew would require many roles, including someone who must scale to the top of the pole and remove the flag. That raised the question of who was physically able to do it, who could also risk being arrested. That narrowed it down to about 3 of us. And of those 3, I was the only Black woman. And we recognized the power that could be symbolized in seeing a Black woman and seeing a descendant of enslaved people in South Carolina take the flag down. So after I volunteered and it was clear that this role was going to be going to me, we talked through more of the symbolism of the action that we wanted to communicate and decided collectively that it should be James Tyson, a white man among us, who volunteered to help me over the fence, stand guard as I climbed, and be arrested alongside me in a display of racial and gender solidarity. We made this decision because for us, it was never simply about a flag, but about abolishing the spirit of hatred and oppression in all its forms. It was a reminder that there is no power or systemic injustice on earth so powerful that it can't be overcome by the power of people working together for the greater good. It was to symbolize that dismantling oppressive systems cannot be the labor of the oppressed alone, but that those who have benefited from such systems of oppression must also stand up and take a stand as well. It ended up being not only symbolic, as you can see in this picture, James is holding on to the pole at the bottom. And the reason that he's doing that is because as I approached the top and was getting ready to unhook the flag, the officers at the bottom actually trained their tasers on me and threatened to shoot me full of electricity as I'm attached to a metal pole, which of course could have electrocuted me. And it was at that time that James held the pole and he said, if you electrocute her, you'll have to electrocute me too. And of course, there were people gathered around, they were watching, they began to shout in protest of what was happening, and eventually the officers backed off. But this is something that we have seen time and time again, where police officers will escalate or de-escalate depending on the skin tone of the person who is involved. I bring everything I have to the cause of freedom. It's a conscious choice I have made to dedicate myself to the causes of democracy and liberation, even to the point of putting my own body on the line. Why? Because I have examined what's at stake for me if I don't. But perhaps even more than that, I've examined the past and repeatedly asked myself, where would we be today were it not for those who recognized what was at stake in the times they lived in? When I consider what's at stake in this current time, I think also of the future, and I ask, what am I doing as an individual? What gifts, what talents, what skills, what resources, what time am I contributing to the collective effort to better humanity? This is a time of great turmoil, obviously. You turn on the news, and a lot of what you see is violence and unrest, and the most consistent message is one of fear. Turmoil isn't something we have to fear, however. Turmoil is an indication that the ground is ripe for sowing the seeds of social change. Every period of awakening and advancement in human history has been marked by this kind of turmoil, and it's true that the darkest hour is right before dawn. So I embrace this as a time of transformation and promise. I consider it a blessing to volunteer and organize at a grassroots level in my community where I can witness the kind of cooperation, innovation, and courage that springs to life when people work together for the betterment of all. It's important that when we give of ourselves, that we do it with an understanding of service leadership. That leadership is first and foremost about service and sacrifice for others, and that giving is first and foremost about grace. People have often spoken of this modern movement as being a leaderless movement, typically as a criticism, but it's more accurate to describe it as leaderful. There's a common belief in shared leadership and collective responsibility. Everyone can help lead the way toward a just society. Everyone carries with them skills, talents, life experience, and knowledge that is valuable to this world. And everyone can apply what they have to the cause of justice. I often get the question, what can I do? People witness daily injustices and societal illnesses and can sometimes feel powerless and overwhelmed by it all. One doesn't have to be a frontline activist in the traditional sense of the word to be impactful. And the reason that I say that is because I think there's often a perception that the front line only looks one way. The front line is only when you are facing down a police line or being tear gassed or being arrested or making news and headlines. But it's key to understand that there are many front lines in this movement. And a movement is about many people doing many things in many places at the same time. I think this recent public health crisis is a reminder of that fact. Many medical professionals have found themselves not just on the front lines of treating illness, but also having to advocate for equal access to care and even access to proper equipment for themselves as doctors and nurses. Civil disobedience and public protest are essential to achieving and maintaining democracy, but justice doesn't come only in the streets. Every person has within them the power to be a change maker. We need all hands on deck, people in every field and from every walk of life. Everyone must ask themselves, what is at stake in these times? Resistance cannot just be a catchy slogan or even something that exists only in response to the current administration. Our issues did not begin in 2016 and they don't end in 2020. The reality is that regardless of the outcome of the current election, we will have a long fight ahead of us. While we fight for progress on reproductive justice, environmental justice, racial justice, trans justice, economic justice, we face an opposition that is just as dedicated to setting our efforts back as far as possible. I do think that one positive good to come out of this era is that it's taught many of us the danger of taking anything for granted. I've had the benefit of being born a generation after the liberation movements of the 60s and 70s. It's almost difficult for me to imagine what life was like before then. But what I can see very clearly, however, is that none of these things can be taken as a given, a guarantee, or something that is cemented forever and incapable of being eroded without constant vigilance and advocacy. Not everyone will be in a position to be arrested. Just as when we came together to plot taking down the flag in South Carolina, we had to assess who could play different roles. But everyone must be prepared to resist the current affront to human rights and democracy in this moment in whatever ways they can. Oppression is the result of organized systems of discrimination, and organized systems of discrimination are comprised of individuals making a series of decisions on a daily basis. Likewise, A successfully organized social justice movement is made up of many people doing many different things in many different places, all toward the same end goal of achieving justice for all. It's about examining where you are in time and place and what actions you can personally take to contribute to a collective effort. It's also very important that we not allow purpose to get lost in process. And what I mean by that is that sometimes we get so caught in the back and forth of how that we forget the why. We can get so caught up on models and statistics and methods and theories that we can almost lose sight of a basic humanity. Ultimately, I believe the root of our social issues is a question of what does it mean to be human? How does our understanding of what it means to be human inform the way in which we order a society that honors the humanity in one another? I think that for all the awful that's happening right now, it is forcing us in many ways to re-examine what matters most in life. We live in a society that's often very preoccupied with productivity and measuring our self-worth based on how much we can produce in a given hour or day. One of the impacts of living through a period of high stress such as this is that it's reminding us of the importance of rest, of allowing ourselves to be human with human limitations, that relying on each other is what makes it all possible and not just the efforts of a single individual. In fact, one of the main reasons I don't hesitate to repeatedly tell people the story of how the flag came down in South Carolina is to make it clear that I didn't do it alone. Oftentimes, our memories of how change comes about is a highlight reel of history. But the reality is that it was many, many people, sometimes many names that don't end up being written down in history books or making headlines, but nothing could have been possible without them. I've been praised a lot for my courage, but I want to point out that courage is not about the absence of fear, but rather the belief in something greater than that fear and the determination to fight for it. I'm certainly not the first to say it. I can simply attest to it firsthand. Courage is rooted in a kind of faith. You have to believe that things can be better and that there's value in taking the necessary risk to make it possible. I faced tremendous fear when I volunteered to climb the flagpole in South Carolina. I returned to my house after that initial meeting and prayed maybe more deeply and more fervently than I ever have in my life. And in that moment, I felt connected to past freedom fighters on another level. It was leaning on my faith in God, leaning on the memory of my ancestors and the faith they had to exercise in the times in which they lived. That's what gave me the courage to do what I did. I understood the risk involved in what I was doing. I understood there was reason to fear what might happen. Yet I also understand that as a human being, the measure of my humanity is linked to my ability to recognize the humanity of others. I knew that I had become part of something so much greater than myself, and that is the universal struggle of humanity toward a society that is truly free and that truly recognizes the rights of all individuals. This is the cause greater than myself that I risked my life for and that I continue to fight for. In terms of where we go from here in the continued fight for social justice, I believe it is crucial that we recognize both the systemic and global nature of injustice. We have to move towards a human rights framework which recognizes the struggle for racial justice in America as being part of a universal struggle for education, housing, democracy, and equal protection under the law. We must address the wealth inequality that exists from centuries of racial oppression and economic exploitation. We must address the systemic injustice that brings generational poverty to the cities and rural communities alike, that breeds the violence of policing and prisons in nations worldwide. What we did in South Carolina was a symbolic action that was as powerful as a symbolic action can be. The fact is, however, that symbols themselves don't make reality what it is. The Confederate flag flew for 63 years over the South Carolina State House. The simple fact of the flag flying there isn't what kept Black Americans oppressed, however. The flag symbolized the oppression, but the oppression itself is the result of racist policies and social practices that continue to this day. To effect real change, we must not only dismantle monuments and symbols, but dismantle the very systems and structures that perpetuate racial disparity and injustice. As we fight to preserve freedoms that are under relentless attack right now, as we fight to expand those freedoms, we should keep constant remembrance of those who paved the way for us to be in this position today. They have provided us a blueprint and an example for how it's done. They've established a precedent that we should always remember, that how it is not how it must always be, that we can dream a new world and then make it so, that the mighty and the powerful can be toppled by the disenfranchised and the dispossessed, that oppressive powers cannot and do not remain in place forever, especially when confronted by a determined collective of people working together in the interest of justice. Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Feel free to, yeah, put the claps. I know I see clap hands. I see, you know, all the things. Feel free. Let's just take a moment and let that sink in. Just take a deep breath. Just breathe it in. Let it out. And one more time, just breathe it in. Feel free to rub in some things that you might want to hold on to a little longer. Just rub it in. Just breathe it in and breathe out. Thank you for that, Bree. Wow, amazing. So we're getting ready to move to our conversation. So I'm gonna introduce the rest of our panelists. And while I do that, feel free to express your love in the chat. Also feel free to put any of your questions that you would like us to bring up in the conversation that we are going to have. Okay, I am Dr. Lakeisha Lockhart. I am a assistant professor in practical theology here at Chicago Theological Seminary. I also do consulting work with the Forum for Theological Exploration. I also am executive secretary for Religious Education Association. So all of this stuff teaches and it matters. And I'm so excited to be part of this conversation and thinking about Black faith, Black life, and Black improvisation, I think as the tagline goes for the center. And I'm excited to have as on our panel, not just Bree, who was already introduced earlier, but also another professor at Chicago Theological Seminary, Dr. Najiba Saeed, who is assistant professor of Muslim and interreligious studies at Chicago Theological Seminary and director of the Bat Khatma, a Center for Muslim Healing Justice. She is recognized as a leader in peace building and social justice-based research and twice received the John Anson Ford Award for reducing violence in schools and in the area of interracial gang conflicts, and was named Southern California Mediation Association's Peacemaker of the Year in 2007. Professor Saeed received the 2017 Scholar Activist Award from Auburn Seminary. Her peace and justice work has been the subject of news reports and documentaries, as well as this film, which aired on NBC, Waging Peace, Muslim and Christian Alternatives. In 2020, her co-edited book with Heidi Hatzel, Critical Approaches to Interreligious Education, Experiments in Empathy, a project supported by the Henry Luce Foundation, was published. The title of her own forthcoming project is Sacred Resistance, Interfaith Rituals of Faith-Based Migration Activists. So feel free to give her some claps. Excited to have her as a colleague. So yeah, we'll be hearing from her in a minute. We have one more person to introduce. And her pronouns are she and her, as are mine. And our next person is Reverend Erica N. Williams, pronouns are also she, her, who is a faith leader, organizer, international civil human rights activist, and community leader who is committed to serving with head and heart. Reverend Erica is a recent graduate of the Howard University School of Divinity, where she obtained a Master in Divinity degree. The context of her ministry lies in the intersectionality of religion, arts, and activism. Currently, she is the National Social Justice Organizer for Repairers of the Breach, an interfaith organization founded by Reverend Dr. William J. Barber Jr. This year, Reverend Erica is serving as lead organizer for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Reverend Erica is the founder, president of Set It Off Outreach Ministry. I don't know if you say it that way, but I felt like I needed to emphasize Set It Off Ministry, a ministry that works to educate, empower, and encourage those on the margins of society. She is also a member of the advisory board for the Christian Education Federation, USA, and the National Homeless Union Association. Reverend Erica is involved in numerous professional organizations. She is a member of the NAACP, National Council of Negro Women, Top Ladies of Distinction, a fellow soror of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and Order of the Eastern Star, Democratic Women's Club, and the International Youth Struggle Movement. So let's give her a round as well, clapping it up. So as you can see, we have some amazing activists, artists, peace builders on this panel that we are so excited to be in conversation with and to hear things about. So I guess I will start by asking a question. And remember, put your questions in the chat. And again, just because we're not in proximity, we are still in community. So feel free to put your yeses in there and your amens. And there's also the reaction buttons that you can clap and do a thumbs up. So let us know what you're feeling there as well. So I'm gonna throw this out to I guess Najiba as well as Erica, thinking about just listening to what we just heard from Bree. And I think the question that is resonating with me that I just cannot stop thinking about is, what is at stake? What is at stake for us during these times, and realizing that, both of you have different contexts and life experiences. So I would love to know, thinking about where we find ourselves after hearing Bree's lecture, what is at stake during these times? I don't know if Najiba or Erica, whoever wants to jump in first.
So I would say, from my tradition, what is at stake is the God-given dignity. In our tradition, we say that from the Quran, that it is God that grants humans dignity. So this work is not a transactional kind of endeavor. It's not work that is done without a sense of God being with you, God being next to you, God walking with you, God being there with you as you climb the pole, Bree, God being with you at every moment. So there's another part, Prophet Muhammad says in the Muslim tradition that there is no veil between the prayers of the oppressed and God. So this is not work that's done out of pity, out of charity. It's done out of a sacred obligation. And if we deny ourselves the opportunity to stand for justice, we deny ourselves the opportunity to stand with God, before God, in the moment that God ordains as the most sacred, because we are there to defend, uphold, speak truth to power, knowing all along that we don't care if other humans attempt to take our dignity. Ultimately, it comes from God.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that. Erica, did you want to jump in?
Thank you so much, dear Sister Bree, and we are so grateful for your witness. And I am just over here just thanking the ancestors for your witness and for your courage. And so tonight, I am just really feeling that brown-skinned Palestinian Jew when he stepped on the scene, when he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, those who had been oppressed by society, to heal the brokenhearted, and to set the captive free, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord now." And then he closed the book and he said, "The scripture today has been fulfilled in your hearing." They said only the Messiah could say that. He said, "I am he." And he went about setting that thing off everywhere he went. And so just like Bree set it off when she took that flag down, that's what's at stake right now. We got to get back to the revolutionary, radical work of Christ and the Prophet Muhammad and all of those who have come before us. And so what we have at stake is, yes, we're in a global pandemic, we're in a global recession, we're in global depression. And even before the pandemic, there was a pandemic. I thank God for the opportunity to work with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival, where we did an audit on America called The Souls of Poor Folks, America from 1967 to current. And what we found was there were 140 million poor, low-income folks in this nation, in America, in the richest country in the world. And so there was a pandemic before the pandemic. And so what we recognize is the fact that our people have been struggling. And as Bree said in her powerful message, is that there is so much at stake, not just with poverty, but with police brutality and so much. And so as Bree told us, we have got to see what's at stake and not sit around and be scared. We have got to put our feet to the pavement and get to work and do as Christ did, as the Prophet Muhammad did, and so many others did, because what's at stake is our lives are at stake, and we got to organize and we got to shake things up like never before.
Shaking things up like never before. Thank you for that. And I think even as Bree said, everyone has a role to play. our part in resistance? What does it look like? It doesn't ever, many front lines, right? And even just thinking about what Najiba was saying, we, again, it's in everything we do, and God, and all of that. So I'm grateful for your sharing. And I know we have some questions coming in, but I just didn't know if Bree wanted a chance to jump in and add anything to this really quick before I start throwing some of the questions from the folks that are sending them in.
I just say amen, ashe, just all of that. I mean, and thank you again for just inviting me to be a part of this amazing event. Thank you for all the comments. I'm reading some of what has been said. And I mean, yes, I completely agree. There was a pandemic before a pandemic. Yes. Understanding that the God we serve is a God of justice and is with us, and there is no veil between the oppressed and God. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna give you their questions because that's what we want to hear from, right? And engage. So this is from Melvin Jones and says, what is a helpful response to the critique that social justice activist movements will become as oppressive as the systems they seek to deconstruct and reconstruct? Let me read that one more time. What is a helpful response to the critique that social justice activist movements will become as oppressive as the systems they seek to deconstruct and then reconstruct?
Sure. I mean, I think that is an outstanding question. That is a question that we have to constantly ask because we have seen that happen so many times. I mean, what we are living right now in the United States is an example of that, right? This is a country that had a revolution a couple of centuries ago, but the revolution did not extend to everyone. Those rights did not extend to everybody. This idea that all men are created equal was not, clearly was not granted to everyone, and it's still not the case today. And so when we are talking about, dismantling systems of oppression, those systems, part of what I was saying in my presentation is we have to understand systems are made up of individuals, right? And we have to fight dynamics not only in the society, but within ourselves. We have to be willing to turn the lens on ourselves and see how are we showing up and perpetuating certain oppressive dynamics, because we have seen so many instances where there are examples of people, leading a revolution against an oppressive power only to become power hungry themselves. And that's why I am definitely of the belief that certainly the struggle that I am trying to show up for is not one that is just about liberating myself and people who are just like me, but everyone. And that's why I really think that a human rights framework is very important, because we're talking about rights that are granted to everyone simply on the basis of being a human being, not on your citizenship, not on your gender, not on your religion, right? Just on the fact that you are a human being and recognizing the humanity in each other. And so that is a question that we constantly have to ask each other. And even within our movements, have to be willing to check and see, are oppressive dynamics showing up, or really how are they showing up? Because oppressive dynamics will absolutely show up in movement space. And that is the conversation that we see going on quite a bit in movement spaces, is dealing with how those oppressive dynamics show up.
Absolutely. Erica and Najiba, do either of you have anything you want to add to that?
I think looking at this as someone who does formation work, there's spiritual formation, but we also have to do deformation. So we carry within us, whether it's internalized oppression, whether it's our own experiences of trauma, those are remembered in our body. And I think that deformation work, as we are deconstructing, defunding, we have to think about decolonizing our bodies as well as part of this work, and our hearts and our minds. And I think what's powerful about religion and what's so incredible about Bree's testimony is that it is a sacred endeavor. And that's what I think religion and spirituality bring to transactional social justice. It's not retributive justice, an eye for an eye. It's something even far greater. It's creating a vision for the future. You may have wounded my eye, but in response, not only do I get justice, but I create a whole new vision for what I stand for.
And I'll just keep it real simple. If we look at the good philosophers, I would say Michael Jackson, he said, I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking if he could change his ways. No message could have been any clearer. If you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make that change. I think that's what a lot of us have got to begin to start doing in our movements, because a lot of times we fight against the system, but we don't take care of the things in our own lives and fight and understand what we have going on. And so I think sometimes we get too, out here with it when we have to start looking internally and see how we're going to show up when we come into these movement spaces. And I'll just be very honest with you. I know in my own life, as I have gone through my journey of organizing, a lot of times I wasn't dealing with the trauma that I was having in my own life. Because see, what we have to remember is in these movements, you're bringing people together who are full of trauma. America has traumatized us, y'all. Let's just be real clear. It don't matter what color you are, you have been traumatized by this system. And so at the end of the day, we have to begin to work on our own healing and see where we are so we can begin to show up better in our movement spaces. Because you are correct, whoever posed the question, we do see these same oppressive structures in the movement spaces because we're not dealing with the very things that we should be dealing with in order for us to show up correctly, to love, to be there to heal and not harm our people.
That is so powerful. And as I'm thinking about how we're bringing all these traumas and how we can show up, I'm also just thinking about sometimes is part of why we're not showing up is that we don't know if we're enough, and realizing that even with the trauma, even with that, we are still enough to show up. We're still enough to come and do the work. That is more than enough in that space. And I think that is so powerful to think about, and that we all have these parts to play and to be present. And I just want to throw another question because we're talking about this, and I think it's very accurate. And this one comes from Makita Eskai, and it says, what can those of us who are leaders in corporate America do to advance this fight? And we're talking about roles, right? What roles can people play? What can we do to advance this fight and revolution in the workplace? So what are maybe some practical things that you think that, especially with thinking about corporate America, I know we're talking about faith, but realizing that this, again, if all of us have something at stake here, what does it look like for those in corporate America whose bodies are also being on the line in different ways?
Well, I guess I can go ahead and jump in. I think that it's important to recognize there is no limit, in my view, to the number of front lines, right? There is no industry, there is no profession that is untouched by systemic oppression. So I again think that there is this moment, kind of to what we were talking about just a second ago, of being willing to look internally as an individual, be willing to look at the company, be willing to look at the corporate structure. How is systemic oppression showing up in the way that things are organized? A lot of my background is in media and communications. We know media and communications industry has long been plagued with issues of systemic oppression, replicating racism, replicating sexism, and playing an enormous role in how people perceive other people in mainstream society, right? Again, I think that a lot of times people think activism is only when you're facing down the police line or getting arrested. And really a lot of the work is that grueling, kind of mundane, not as flashy work of really looking at structures, looking at bureaucracy, looking at hiring practices, looking at the wage gap. I mean, there's a lot of things that I think everybody could do where they are, especially in the business world.
Thank you. I don't know if Erica or Najiba want to add anything to that. No. I just want to add that I think you brought up an amazing point earlier about symbols, right? And not in how it starts with dismantling the symbols, right? Seeing them, naming them for what they are, and then moving to structures and systems and structures. And so I'm wondering if even part of that is naming the symbols that are in those particular places, right? Knowing that everything that we see and touch teaches. What does it mean when you have an image of, monocultural image, monocultural image, or all these different things that it might be up on the wall, or in how are the offices stages, how every single thing teaches and affects change. And what does it mean to call even those symbols out, right? And how, even if that can potentially be a good starting place. I appreciate you saying that. And I know we have another question that was, hold on, pulling it up. Okay, so how do you find hope when these times can seem hopeless? What centers you and helps you refocus? I'll just let that sit there and feel free to jump in.
You know, it's been a rough few months since we've been in this pandemic. And from the police brutality to all of the people who have died as a result of reckless leadership to handling of COVID-19. And I'm just going to be real honest with y'all on tonight. My soul has been really heavy. My heart has been heavy. You know, I felt some days like, Lord, how long? How long are we going to have to continue to go through this, especially as we as Black people, you know, as I said, we were in a pandemic before a pandemic. Our folks are dying at unprecedented rates because we ain't never had no access to quality health care and food and shelter. And so I had to finally make my way home to Saginaw, Michigan, which is right next door to Flint. And I got home a couple weeks ago, and I've been here being able to talk with family and friends and to talk with the people who helped me to get in this game of justice. The people who don't have much education, but they sure got some PhDs in common sense. And these folks have showed me and told me that, you know what, we have been down, we have been out, but we ain't giving up. I just had a conversation with a lady who took care of my grandmother, Miss Willie G. Morris, who I want to bring in this conversation, who was from Troy, Alabama, who didn't have much, but my grandma knew that what she had, we all had together. And my grandma used to always say, we gonna be all right. She knew Kendrick Lamar's words before he knew them. She said, we gonna be all right. And so, you know, the lady who took care of my grandmother, she sat there and she had tears in her eyes because last year she had to have brain surgery and she didn't know where the bills and everything was gonna come from and she wanted to give up. She said, but I've been this way before and I haven't allowed for it to take me back. And so what I'll say to us tonight, we've been this way before. America has been this way. This ain't nothing new. We've been in some hard times. And when I see the faces of people whose backs been against the wall and they didn't have nobody to call, they couldn't call no Ghostbusters. They had to call on Jesus. They had to call on their communities and they came together and they fought. Just like Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Josephine Baker and Septima Clark and all the ancestors before us, they did not allow for what they saw to hinder what they believed. And so tonight I am encouraged as I sit here in my kitchen in Saginaw, Michigan, from looking at the faces of people who are in deep, deep waters, but they won't allow for the waters to overtake them. They continue to rise and continue to stand because we know that we can fight together and better days are ahead. So that's where I get my hope. My people are my reason. I ain't never giving up.
Bree or Najiba, do you want to jump in?
I mean, you know, I kind of feel like I said it, you know, in my presentation. I really, part of where I draw my hope from is because we are living it. I mean, we are living the dreams and the sacrifices of people who came before us. So I don't accept when people say something is impossible. Like I simply can't accept that because I have seen where society has been. There was a time when people thought it was impossible to end slavery. There was a time when people thought a lot of things were impossible. And now we take those things for granted, you know? So I really draw hope from the concrete fact that I have seen what is possible. And that is what keeps me going, you know? And I just say amen to everything that Reverend Erica said. Absolutely.
I would just add that I don't think hope is a belief or a state of mind. I think hope is a process that's created, sustained, developed, nurtured in community. And I was thinking, you know, for me, I never come to this work thinking I'm weak. I never come to this work thinking that I need a seat at the table. I come to this work because I know, as Linda Tuhuwai Smith tells us, that the presence of people who have lived through oppression is a testimony to that oppression. So the fact that we're living and surviving is a testimony. I think I'm so powerful that people are afraid of me. So that's my attitude when I come to this table. That's my attitude when I engage with people. That's my spirit when I come to the table, because I'm not asking for a place at the table. I'll go make my own table because I've been making my own tables for a while and I'm really good at it. My table is so beautiful. So when I come to this place and I come to this space around hope, I think about it as, and I think that's what we learned from Minister Malcolm X, is to come into this work with your full power, your full voice, and to know that it's not that you are less, it's actually because you are far more, that there is fear, and that fear is consistently thrown back at you to make you undermine yourself. But I don't allow that to happen. So I just wanted to kind of reflect on that hope as a process built in community, and that we, whoever we are sacred because God has given us the capacity to survive what so many others have not. And we will be here and we will keep speaking.
Amen, Ashe. I'm over here, I'm just getting all of my life together. Yes, that's right. Just turn the whole table over, right? Isn't that what it's about? We don't even need the table. Just get rid of it, create our own. I love it. All right, so I know I'm seeing our time, and I know this conversation is getting great. So so we're gonna have to start wrapping it up. I know, don't blame me. I mean, we just got, we're trying to be conscious of everybody's time. Zoom fatigue is real. So I'm gonna take a question from Ross Gallagher. Hope I pronounced that right. How does the idea of protected class interfere with the goal of creating a society where everyone is treated equally based on their common humanity? Let me say that one more time. How does the idea of protected class interfere with the goal of creating a society where everyone is treated equally based on their common humanity?
So I would jump in. I actually don't think that it does. Like, I would kind of challenge the premise of that question somewhat. Not to say that I'm not, challenging the validity of the question. I just, in my view, would kind of challenge that premise, because I think that protected class is an important part of how we make sure that everyone is treated equally. I think there are certain things that we have to acknowledge. One, we're talking about confronting systems of oppression, we have to acknowledge the realities of those oppressions. And when we're talking about creating protected classes, we have to talk about the classes that have been created to be disproportionately harmed, right? So, for instance, if we are talking about gender oppression, we can't ensure that everyone receives equal protection unless we are looking realistically at how gender oppression has operated in this society, right? If we are talking about ableism, if we're making sure that everyone has equal access to facilities and we are valuing everyone's life, we have to look at the reality of being in a tradition where we tend to discard people who have disabilities, discard the elderly, discard the ill and the sick. And so I think a lot of times when people kind of raise that question, the assumption is that by somehow creating a protected class, or by, going about dismantling oppression in a targeted way, that somehow that creates inequality. And I just don't think that is really realistic. I think that we have to look realistically at who tends to be the most privileged people within any given society or situation, who tends to have disproportionate power over others. And we have to, if we are trying to create a more equitable society, then that requires really looking at who are the disenfranchised classes and creating policies and practices that specifically address that. Another example I would use briefly is when people talk about creating a colorblind society. I don't think that's realistic. Like, I don't think that we go from centuries of living under a system of racial oppression to saying, okay, well, now the way that we address it is to simply act like race doesn't exist, or that people are not still making judgments about people based on how they look and the color of their skin and the texture of their hair, the language that they speak. That's not really realistic, and so the only way that we can realistically address it in the law is to have laws that specifically address those forms of oppression, so that when they show up, we are dealing with it specifically. We can't simply act like it doesn't exist. I don't think that is the way that we truly achieve equality. Now, hopefully down the line, such things would not be necessary. But realistically, when we are only 50 years out from Jim Crow, 100 years or more out from chattel slavery, it's going to take more, targeted policy before we would get to such a point.
Absolutely. Thank you. Najeeba or Erica, do either of you want to jump in? No? Okay. That was our last question. Thank you, all of you, Najeeba, Erica, Bree. I'm so glad. And Bree, any final word or thing that you want to leave with the people before Christoph closes us with a blessing?
No, I just thank you all so much again. I really appreciate it. And again, I just encourage everyone, there's something that you can do. You have a purpose, you have a value, in this life. Like I just challenge everybody to examine what that is. It doesn't always have to be flashy. It doesn't have to be something that makes headlines, but it will be invaluable. Don't underestimate the impact that you can make as an individual in this society and in this moment.
Thank you so much. And if I can quote you, don't allow purpose to get lost in the process. Remember your why, remember what's at stake. Thank you so much, Bree. We are so thankful for you. Thank you so much, Najiba. And thank you so much, Erica. We appreciate you all for being real, being honest, giving of yourselves, your time, your energy. We don't take any of that lightly. I know our CTS community has been blessed. I've been blessed by this whole conversation. So thank you. And yeah, Christoph, feel free to lead us out. I think we've all been nourished tonight.
We have. And to Bree Newsome Bass, once again, thank you for calling us deeper into this work and calling us back to our humanity. And thank all of the participants for sharing so freely and richly. This has been a truly edifying evening. And I just wanted to briefly acknowledge Dr. Alex Jean-Charles, Roxy Cooey, Shauna Warren, Marie Whitney, and Tyler Tully. They were the ones behind the scenes creating this virtual reality that we've been experiencing on this evening. So just wanted to acknowledge them. And at this point, I'm going to ask our president, Dr. Stephen Array, to give us closing words.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Ringer, and thank you all for being here this evening for this wonderful opportunity to engage in dialogue and also to be filled with encouragement and with hope. I just want to close with two things, and then I'll say a quick blessing. But the two things I want to close with is I want to remind you the history of Chicago Theological Seminary is one that we were founded by abolitionists who were standing against the evil of their day. When we were founded in 1855, it was at the height of the anti-slavery movement. Now, I bring that up for a reason. And what that reason is that Chicago Theological Seminary exists for the future. We do our work today, but we exist for the future so that there might be a different tomorrow. So in this work, what I would challenge each and every one of you to do is to remember that you do this work not for yourself. You do this work not for people who are traversing the earth that we live upon today, but for those who come after us, our descendants, who are depending on us to give them a future worth having. So I encourage each and every one of you to stay strong in the struggle, to give your life over to it, because for my tradition, and I'm a Reformed Calvinist, we think that our salvation is not something that you have, it's something that you do. And so to the extent that in your life, faith is real, whether it be faith in God, faith in humanity, or simply faith in the goodness of life, that what you do with that faith is to make this world a better place for our descendants. And as you do this work, I want you always to remember that Chicago Theological Seminary will be a place that stands with you, will be a place that encourages you, will be a place engaged in the production of new ideas, new dreams, and new hopes that we can yet imagine. And I offer my hand of friendship. I offer my commitment to you that this school will always be there for our descendants, because this struggle, again, while it may seem like it is for us, it's actually for those who are waiting yet to trod this earth. And we are, in an act of faith, giving them a future worth having. So I know I said that I was going to give some closing remarks, but you know, Dr. Ringer is a much better preacher than me. So I'll leave the closing words for him. And just once again, thank you all so much for being with us, and God blessings to each of you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ray. To all who are present, I just want to say, may you continue to be sustained by your faith. May you find the courage that you need, and may God be with you, and please be well. God bless.
You thought I was worth saving, so you came and changed my life. You thought I was worth keeping, so you cleaned me up inside. You thought I was to die for, so you sacrificed your life so I could be free, so I could be whole, so I could tell everyone I know. Come on and sing it with me if you know it today. You thought so you cleaned me up inside. You thought I was, yeah. So you sacrificed so I could. You thought you thought I was, oh, so you clean, so you sacrificed your life. I could be free, I could be whole. So you came, so you cleaned me up inside. You thought so I could be whole. Here's my part right here. I say hallelujah, glory to the God who changed my life, and I will praise you. I'll give you glory. I'll worship your name because I am, and I will. Come on, lift your voice and say hallelujah. Say glory. And I will praise you. I'll worship you. I'll give you glory forever and ever. As long as I breathe, as long as I live, as long as I move, because I am. Oh, you thought I was worth saving, so you came and changed my life. You thought I was worth keeping, so you cleaned me up inside. You thought I was to die for. Hallelujah. You thought I was to die for. Oh, you thought I was to die for. You sacrificed your life for me because you thought my life mattered, because you thought I was worth it. Oh, so I could be free.